Hello, everybody, and welcome to Comsverse. We are winding down last day, but we've got some great sessions coming up here. Today's is Mastering Microsoft Teams with PowerShell, and we have Chris Goosen and Justin Harris with us to present. We will be taking questions throughout and save time at the end, so if you have any, just while you think of them, put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to those. Also wanted to remind you that we do have a breakout immediately following after this session. And so if you wanted to talk to Justin and Chris in more depth, you are welcome to join. I will put the link in the Q&A as well as an announcement. And finally, we do have a survey that I will post. We'd love to get your feedback on this session, but all of the sessions that you've attended while you've been at Comsverse. We definitely want to know what you're thinking and get your feedback for future events like this. So with that, I will turn things over to Justin and Chris.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lori. Really appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Well, we'll kick off. So we're talking about PowerShell and Microsoft Teams. So firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Chris Goosen. I work for a cybersecurity company called Kudelski Security. And more specifically, I work in the Microsoft security practice at Kudelski. I have a history in the exchange world, and you know, as time has changed and as customers have started adopting the cloud over the last 10 or so years, I've seen my focus shift a lot more into the cloud space and the automation space. I'm a 7-time Office Apps and Services MVP. Just recently received that 7th award, which I'm you know, super humbled and honored by. And I got some social links here. I have a blog and a Twitter handle, and I'm also the co-host of a podcast called The Cloud Architects, where we talk about all things cloud and the technology and the people using it. I'm going to hand over to Justin to introduce himself as well before we kick off.
Thanks, Chris. I'm the CTO for eNow Software. Similar background to you, longtime Exchange consultant, and spent a lot of time working with that product, but times change, right? So now I'm passionate at building products, solving problems with customers that choose to leverage the Microsoft collaboration stack. So it's a great time to be in this space. A lot of great problems that can be solved with the Office 365 suite, especially Teams. So excited to be here to present with you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, let's have a look at really what we're going to look at in the session today. So, you know, we keep it really high level, but ultimately we're talking PowerShell, which is, you know, one of my favorite things, and how we can actually help ease the administration burden of Teams using PowerShell. Now, as with so many things in our world, there are always multiple ways to do it. So we're going to take a look at how one would approach this using the actual Teams PowerShell module and what that all entails. Then we're also going to look at something called the Microsoft Graph PowerShell SDK, which is just a awesome new sort of development in the space, something that I'm really excited about, and I've been getting my hands dirty with it quite a lot over the last little bit. And really looking forward to talking through that. And then what we're going to do is just run through some sort of brief demos where we actually take a look at, you know, some basic admin tasks and how we would approach those tasks in both options, right? So looking through the PowerShell module way and then looking at the SDK and how we would do that. And that's really what we're going to do. And then I'm a big fan of kind of resources, right? We have a wonderful community. The community is awesome, and there are so many folks contributing to the community. So I wanted to make sure to kind of include some resources and some of the go-to places that I go for information. And so I've left a slide there just for some, you know, with some resources there to help you all on your way as you kind of move through this. What I wanted to do real quick is just kind of set the stage here, right? I think that as IT pros, we've evolved a lot over the years, over the last 10 or so years, and really we're at a place where we're writing more code than ever before, right? And I'm specifically talking about an IT pro, not a developer here. You know, when we started, if you think about, you know, Exchange being one of the first PowerShell applications back in 07, and since then we've kind of evolved, right, from this place where we're using commandlets to do things, to using one-liners, stringing commandlets together to actually achieve something, and then taking those one-liners and building out sort of scripts that can really do, quite a whole lot of things, some really heavy lifting for us. And then into this new world of automation where, we take those scripts again and we build them into run books and schedules and things like that. And so what we're going to look at today is looking at, the first three of those evolutionary steps, if you will, right? So take a look at some just basic commandlets, and we'll string together some one-liners, and then kind of look at some scripts as well towards the end as to how we can make this really useful for you. So if we start our journey here with the Microsoft the Teams PowerShell module, right? So those folks who've been using and administering Office 365 for a while, this wouldn't be new to you. PowerShell modules and the way they work. Obviously you install the module or either as a separate download or just from the PowerShell gallery, and you import it and you're able to connect to the service, right? Now, what makes the Teams PowerShell module really awesome is that it actually runs on all versions of PowerShell. So you can use it on newer versions, newer than version 6, which we refer to as PowerShell Core, or you can run it on the desktop version of PowerShell, which would be something that is standard installed on your Windows 10 machine. Now, there are some challenges at the moment. There are some little things that don't always work when you're running it on PowerShell Core. And so the current guidance really is if you're going to use the Teams PowerShell module, you want to use just PowerShell Desktop or PowerShell 5.1, because that's going to give you the best experience. My experience with that has been that the things that don't work are things like credential auth, right? I've not been able to authenticate using credentials through the PowerShell module for a bit. So fall back to 5.1, and that's going to give you the best place to be right now. But in order for us to do a complete job of actually administering a Teams environment, we actually need additional modules, right? Because of the architecture of Teams, it isn't just one place. And so we have various places within the service that we actually need to be in order to do these admin tasks. And so you'll notice I've called these additional modules because technically they're not requirements. You don't have to have these installed, but they're going to make your life easier, and there's going to be a lot of places where you need to cross commandlets that are across module to be able to get things done. So the commandlets that specifically are the Skype Online connector, which we also call the Skype for Business PowerShell module. Azure AD, the Azure AD PowerShell module, which is from the gallery, and Exchange Online, which as of version 2 is also available from the PowerShell gallery. Now, what's interesting, what's really interesting here about the Teams module is that the current preview version of the module, which is version 1.1.3, actually includes the Skype connector pieces as well. So if you are going to run the preview, you actually don't need the Skype connector piece separately. But if you're going to run the latest build, it doesn't quite have that just yet. So you're going to need the two separate. My demo environment is running 1.1.3, so I'll show you how that looks when we get there. This deck was built over the weekend, and it's already out of date because version 1.1.4 I think was released on Monday, and that is the latest build, but it doesn't have the connector inclusion. So just be kind of careful there. You want the preview module, and I think we kind of cover that on the next slide anyway. In terms of permissions, this really is no departure from what you're used to as far as administration in Office 365 goes. So, you can either be a global admin and you can obviously get everywhere, or you can kind of tone it down and you can give folks just the right level of access to do what they need. So Team Service Admin will work, but I will caution as well that there are some of these crossovers in modules where if someone doesn't have the correct permissions in the other areas, they may not be able to do some of those tasks. So a great example of that is if someone is a Teams service admin, they're not going to be able to run the Get Unified Group commandlet, which is an Exchange Online module. So you want to make sure that you kind of are matching your RBAC roles across, the requirements of what the role will be and what your users or your admins are going to be looking to achieve. So as far as the installation goes, like I said, we can install most of these through the gallery by running the install -module commandlet. If you've got the Skype module, the Skype Online connector downloaded separately, you could just import it. if you are running the Teams module, which 113 preview, you could also just import the Skype connector. Actually, you could just import a new session from there. So makes it a lot easier with the preview module. And we expect to see when that is actually GA that the requirement for the Skype Online connector goes away. So nice and easy and kind of really really easy to go, but it requires a few modules, as you can see. So in contrast, if we were to look at the Microsoft Graph PowerShell SDK, which is it's a mouthful, and Graph isn't something that's new, right? And I think it's important to kind of set the context here before we kind of dig into this and kind of explain a little bit what it is. Microsoft Graph is not new. The Graph API has been around for a while, and we've been able to interact with it through PowerShell for some time now. The difference has been that those interactions previously have been through web calls, right? So you would do an invoke a web request with a JSON formatted request, and you would receive results back from the API in a JSON format that you can then pass and use as you needed. It's not a big deal. It worked really well. It still works really well. It's really fast, but it's a little intimidating if you're not a developer or you don't have a development background to be, creating JSON requests and stuff like that. And so where the Graph, the PowerShell SDK comes in is that it essentially takes all of those requests and wraps it nicely into PowerShell commandlets that we know and love so much. So it's a really cool new thing. I think it was first released in preview back in December. So it's a little over 6 months. It's been out now. I'm going to call out that it is in preview, and there are a bunch of little things that don't quite work the way they expect or you think they would. And I'll show you a few little quirks when we get into the demo environment. Again, available through PowerShell 5.1 and later. To me, the real value of this is that if you were to run PowerShell core, you can make this work. You can make your scripts work on any platform now, right? I'm a Mac user, and so for me, this is great because I no longer need to use VMs to do basic PowerShell into Office 365. I can run the SDK on my Mac, my scripts work, and I'll show you a little bit about that later on as well. The SDK uses the OAuth device flow, or otherwise sometimes called the device code authentication. So essentially, when you make your connection request, you get given a URL and a code, and you can sign in from any machine, right? This is really handy when you are in scenarios where you may not have access to a specific environment. I've used this in the past where I've worked with customers in sort of merger and acquisition situations where we've needed to perform some tasks in an environment where we didn't have access, and so you can run kick off the connection request from your side, give the customer or the admin on the customer side the code that they need. They can go in and authenticate as themselves for you, and you've never seen or touched a username and a password. Now, obviously, if someone's going to do that, they need to make sure that whatever you're going to run and whatever permissions are being granted is not going to cause trouble in the environment, right? So there's a fair bit of due diligence there, but it's a very, very handy way to authenticate. And you can get really fine-grained on the permissions because we're using the API permissions. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I think on the next slide, I'll show you how to find that. But you can kind of scope it right down to the very specific permission that is required for the very specific action that you're going to perform. And that can be, like I said, very, very handy in a whole bunch of different situations. Another really good benefit of this is that you no longer actually need to create an Azure AD application in order for the authentication process to work. That was something that you had to do previously if you were going to do web calls. Now this is built into the SDK. So just to kind of show you, this is the Graph REST API documentation, and you can kind of see from a permission perspective, if you were to go and find the action that you want to perform, it's really nicely spelled out for you what permissions are needed. And I love the fact that it's listed out from least to most privileged. So if you are building a script or building something that requires least privileged permissions, you can go and see right here what it is you need. And so in this instance, you can see we need group.rewriteAll in order to create a team, right? And this is listed out like this for pretty much every action within the the API. So really, really useful to be able to do that. I mentioned that, you know, we're really just wrapping PowerShell commandlets around some of these API calls. So if we were to take a step back and think about how we used to interact with Graph through PowerShell, here's a really, really good example. And this example is taken from a script written by a fellow called Lee Ford, who's based in the UK. He's an MVP based in the UK. He has some really amazing things on his blog. I have included that in the resource slide at the end of the slide deck. But he has a script that does sort of backup of content and config of in your Teams environment. And this is the logic that was used in that script to be able to authenticate to Graph. Now, all of this is replaced by a single one-line commandlet in the SDK. So it really just shows kind of how powerful and how much more user-friendly it is using the SDK to get into working with Graph. So really, it's a single module install. So install-module Microsoft.graph, and then to connect, you're essentially doing connect-graph, and you're providing the permissions that you want to you know, connect as. So really, really simple. All right. Well, I guess let's get into some demos here. I'm going to pause for just a second here while I switch screens. If anyone has any questions at this time, that'll be a really good time to ask them while I just change screens into my demo environment. Okay. So what you should see on screen right now is standard Windows 10 machine. And I already have, so I'm using the terminal, and I have some PowerShell sessions that I've already opened here. Right, and so I'm going to just kind of step through some tasks here. Some of these may be very familiar to you, and you know, if you've seen these before, please bear with me. But we're going to kind of step through some tasks and just kind of go through it here. So essentially, I have two sessions open on this machine. The first on the very left window, you can see this is a PowerShell core session, and I'm connected via the Graph SDK. And on the right-hand side, this is just a PowerShell desktop version 5.1. And I've connected all of the other modules that we talked about previously, right? So I have the Teams module is connected here. I'm using the 1.1.3 preview. I have the Azure AD module. I'm connected to Exchange Online. And I also have the, I've imported, actually, I don't think that I have imported the session for the CS commandlets yet. So I'm going to show you how that kind of all works. So if we take a quick look here, just going to show the so we can see these are the commandlets available to me in the Teams module 1.1.3, and like I said, what's really interesting here is you can see these CS commands, which are the ones that are now being included and no longer require that Skype for Business module to be included separately. So specifically the one we're really interested in is new CS Online session. So I'm going to cheat just a little and save you all the having to watch me type, and I'm going to just import that session real quick. So I can have access to those commandlets. Cool. So a really good way to test this is actually just to look up our Teams interop or coexistence mode, right? So if you're migrating from Skype environment to Teams, the Teams upgrade mode is something that you may want to look at quite a lot of. And to get to that, we look at the actual user under Get CS Online User. And so I'm going to kind of cut out a lot of the white noise, if you will, and we'll just list the user principal name of the users, and we'll have a look at what their Teams upgrade mode is in the environment. So this is just talking in. We'll see all of the users in this environment, this demo tenant, they're all in Teams only mode. right? So that's a really good place to start. So we know we're in teams and we're going to go kind of go and have a look. So for us to have a look at the teams in our environment, we actually have two ways that we can do this. So we can firstly, we can query just teams through the teams commandlet, and we can say get team to actually show me the teams. I'm going to store these in a variable just because it makes it easier for me to reuse them. So if we take a look there, we'll see we have 6 teams in our environment that we're kind of working with, right? And you can kind of see a whole bunch of information. Very importantly here, we can see the group ID, which is something that we're going to use a fair bit later on. But another way we can do this, and we actually can get a fair bunch of information, is we can query the underlying group. And to do that, we actually use the an exchange commandlet called the get unified group commandlet. And what that's going to do is that's actually going to go and query Exchange Online for anything that is a unified group in the environment. So if we come back, we'll see we actually have a few more groups here that are listed when compared to the teams, and that's because every group doesn't have to be a team, right? But every team has an underlying group. So there's a really great way for us to actually filter that down, and we can do that by looking at a property on the group called resource provisioning options, and we're going to see that in the API a little later on as well. So if we were to rerun that and we just show me the resource provisioning options, we can see there that those are the ones, the 6 that are our actual team. So if we wanted to filter that even more, we could do that. So now we have only the groups that have the resource provisioning option set to team, right? Now notice there's an ID looking field. So if you look under name on the left hand side, it kind of has the name of the group, but it also has a GUID in it of some sort. Now it's very important to not get that confused with the actual team ID, which is the actual ID of the team. And I'm going to compare them for you in just a second. So if we go back to listing out our teams, you'll see that they're kind of similar, but they're not quite the same. Now, whenever we work within teams, we're going to be using the team ID or the group ID over here. We don't want to get that confused with what the actual group name is. And we can actually look on the group itself. There is a property that contains that value for us, and it's called the external directory object ID. So if we were to do that and we compare that to our list of our teams, you can see that those are actually exactly the same thing. So if you're going to be working from or writing a script where you're interrogating the group itself, the underlying group, and not the team, you can still get that the team ID or the group ID for the particular team from that external directory object ID field. So that's a really kind of nice way to do that without having to make multiple run multiple commandlets if you wanted to script something. So if we wanted to dig just a little deeper, so we now know what groups or what teams are in our environment. We actually want to look at what channels we have within these teams. Well, that's pretty easy. We can use the get team channel commandlet, and this is going to take a group ID. So we could pick a group here and say, let's say we want to take the US sales, and we're going to use that, and that'll allow us to kind of dig into the actual team and have a look at what the actual channels are within that team. So we can see we have a general channel, which all of them will have. We have a sales east and sales west, right? And then from here we can dig further into that as well. It's kind of down and down the rabbit hole goes. But how about, so we now know what our teams are. How about we want to look at memberships within the team? So we can use get team user for that. And again, it's going to take the same group ID to be able to make that work. So we can dig down. And from here, obviously now we're in familiar territory, right? If we can grab a user principal name, we can do get AD user. Oops, did that not work? I guess the AD user module didn't import. We'll skip that, but you can take the get the user principal name and actually dig into it using get AD user. You know what? I'm being a little silly. Give me one sec. It's going to be Azure AD user. That's what we want. And we can't forget that we would need to use the object ID for that. And so here we are kind of digging deeper into the actual user, and we can kind of, like I said, keep diving and see what sort of licensing options they have. And I imagine for anyone who's an Office 365 admin, this may be something that you've done a few times by now, which is kind of digging into a user and actually taking a look at their licensing and things like that. So that there is pretty much where we kind of get to as far as the modules go. And you can see we've actually used modules from or commandlets from multiple different modules to get to this point, right? Another really handy and probably quite often used commandlet is just actually looking at licensing, right? So what license SKUs do I have in the tenant, and what are the consumed units of those, right? So Enterprise Premium, I believe, is E5 and Enterprise Pack E3. So you can kind of list that out. There is a reference in the resources part of the deck to decoding the SKU part numbers to actual readable formats. So don't stress if you don't understand what those are. There is some really good documentation on that. But ultimately, the point I was kind of getting to here is that with the Teams module, we can do a whole lot of work on the Teams side, and we can interact with our teams through PowerShell. But to be effective at administering our Teams environment, we are actually going to be using multiple modules, right? We're going to use the Teams module. We're probably going to use the Exchange Online module. We're going to be using the Skype for Business module, and so forth, to be able to get to kind of where we want to be. So now, what does that look like if we were to take the same scenarios, but we actually want to do that through Graph, right? So like I said, we can use the Graph SDK, which really wraps it up for us really nicely, and we can kind of go and dig a little deeper into it through here. So I've already connected to the SDK through here, and really what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show. Let's take a look at what we're working with as far as commandlets go, right? So we're going to do get command. Every commandlet within the SDK starts with MG for Microsoft Graph. So if we wanted to take a look at everything that is available to us, let's list out everything that has an MG in the name of a commandlet. And you can see that there's a lot. Like I've not gotten through every single one of these, but we have the ability through this one SDK. We have the ability now to interact to everything within the service, right? So we can do things within Planner. You can see OneNote. We have a bunch of different things, and there's so much available to us here, and this is just kind of mind-blowing. So this is why I think this is such an exciting addition to the arsenal. And you can see here we have a bunch of things with groups and calendars and mailboxes, and just it's an endless list, right? So how about we just narrow that down to MG and team, because we want to just look at what sort of things do we have available to us as far as Teams is concerned, right? Now, you would think that, similar to with the module where we said get team and we wanted to look at teams, you could just jump in here and go, well, get MG teams seems like that would do what we're looking for. But unfortunately, it actually doesn't. So we'll wait for that error message. There we go. You can't just list out teams, right? So what now? Well, okay. Typically, when we need to find some help about a PowerShell commandlet, we would use the get help command, right? Let's have a look. Well, that's not super helpful either. And again, like I called out at the beginning, this is a preview SDK, so some things are not fully baked just yet. So we're not going to really figure it out through here. But fortunately for us, there's some really good documentation on the actual Graph API. And so we can dig into the Graph API to understand what endpoint we need, for example. So if we wanted to list groups, which is essentially the team, we would use the groups endpoint instead of the teams endpoint, which is what we were looking at before, right? And again, here we can see the permissions required to be able to get and interact with that endpoint. So really, really handy. So there's actually a help article specifically on how to list teams within the organization. And again, you can see we're using the groups endpoint for that. So if I switch back to our session here, I'm going to do pretty much what I did previously, which was, oops, that was not what I did previously. Give me 1 second here. We're going to do a just query all the groups in the environment, right? But this time we're going to do it through the SDK. So again, I'm going to pop it into a variable so that we can actually reuse it and kind of look at it. And if I were to list that, that's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, it's not JSON, so we're not having to super parse stuff. We can see the ID of what we're working with, which is something that we need. And we can see the name, so that's pretty good. But we have there's a bunch here. So obviously some of these are not actual teams, right? Some of these are all the groups in the organization, so, or in the tenant. So if we wanted to drop that down a little bit, we could again use the resource provisioning options parameter to filter this for us, and we'll put that into a teams variable this time. So now we're pretty sure that we have basically our list of teams. So now we have the display name and the ID of the team, and we can kind of continue to interact with the team through that. So so similarly, again, now that we have these, we can say that didn't type anyway. Type anywhere either. There we go. We can actually interact with the Teams endpoint now and actually give us information about that. So we want to say, we're going to use the US sales again. And oops, I'm all over the show today. So team ID, which we have, and we can make that request. And now we have back the information that we need about the specific team. This is using Graph. We can do exactly the same thing with the channels as we did before. So this time we get MG channel. Hang on, get MG team channel. And then we're not going to use channel ID. We're going to use the same team ID again that we had used previously. And there we go. We can see our channels just the same as we had done previously, right? So, well, what about members? We want to be able to see the members of the team, right? That's a really useful thing to us. So again, this is really handy because it's all a very similar command syntax that we may be used to, and you can look these up if you really need to. But get MG group member would be what we would need for that. And again, I'm going to put the same. We're working with the same team here, which is the US sales. And here we go. Now, this is where it gets a little funky because previously when we had done that with the Teams module, see if I can scroll up a little bit. It gave us, the user ID, but it also gave us the user's UPN, and we could see the user's name and their role. We don't quite get that much information from this particular call, so we would actually have to go do multiple lookups here to kind of dig a little deeper. So now that we have a user name or user ID, we could do get MG user, and I need to get better at typing. We can take this ID, and that will give us more information about that specific user. So we're kind of digging just a tad deeper into it than we were previously. But really, that's kind of where we're at with that. One last one, I guess, just to show is looking at licensing within the tenant. So I'm using multiple windows here, and switching between them is definitely getting me in trouble today. So we'll try that again. Okay, there we go. We'd use the get MG subscribed SKU commandlet for that. And again, this is a graph call to go and have a look. And here we can actually format, so how many units or how many licenses we have of a particular type versus the what's been consumed, right? So that's really just going through some really kind of basic administration and kind of showing the differences between the Teams module and what you could do with the SDK. I kind of want to step back for a second and we'll step that up a little bit, right? Look at some reporting. And Microsoft does a great job of giving us pre-canned reports within the admin center. There's so much we can just get natively from an information perspective. But every now and then we kind of come across a question or an ask, or there's something that we need where we need to go and roll our own reports, right? We need to find some information that most of the population are not using, and we want to kind of get that. And a great way to do that is through PowerShell, and actually by stringing together a bunch of commandlets, we can kind of script out some reports. What we're looking at here is a report that was put together by an MVP called Nathan O'Brien. And Nathan's a great guy, lives out in Portland, and he put together this reporting script that kind of gives you a really good snapshot of your team's environment. And so in this PowerShell window here, I'm already logged in, and I'm going to run this report. And while that's going, we'll step through it for a second. But essentially, what we're doing here is we're going to get a list of all the teams, and then we're going to go look at some things within the team, right? So we're going to get all the members of the team. We're also going to go and identify the document library within SharePoint for that particular team and the mailbox for that team. And then we're going to go and get some information about it. So we're going to get some storage information, which we're going to store in the storage used part of the document library. And then we're also going to look at how many conversations are stored within the mailbox. And then we're going to just output that into a table. Now, this is really basic. You could take this output and you could write some, really funky reports with it. You could output it to CSV, XML, or whatever. But just as a way of kind of demonstrating, we can see that this is a really neat way to do it. And we can see here that we've got this really neat output of all of our teams, giving us storage use, Teams chat, messages, things like that, right? When I was looking at this in prepping for this session, I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we took the same script and we used the API to do it? Now, in full disclosure, there are some features that I did not port, so I don't look at the mailbox and I don't look at SharePoint. But I've kind of taken as much of the original script as I could and just changed some commandlets to now make it use the SDK. And what I'm going to do with that is I actually going to run this on my Mac to show that we can run these reports now sort of cross-platform through the SDK. So I'm just going to switch over from that window to one that I have here. Right there. And this is just PowerShell 7 running on my Mac. And I've taken this exact same the script file that I showed previously, and it is just sitting here. So I'm going to do the script, and I'm going to run that. This is just PowerShell call doing with the SDK. And firstly, you can see how much quicker it was. Now, granted, we're not interrogating SharePoint. We're not looking at Exchange Online, mailboxes, and things like that. But we are running PowerShell just on the Mac using that single module. And to me, that's one of the really, really cool benefits of the SDK is that we can do things like this, right? Is go ahead and actually run our code cross-platform. This should work exactly the same on Linux. I'll be honest, I haven't tried it, but I believe that it will. So in the interest of time here, I'm going to kind of just get back to the last slide that I had before I hand back over to Justin. So we kind of went through from a demo's perspective, just some everyday admin tasks, things that you may do in your daily life, and we kind of compared between the PowerShell module versus what those would look like using the SDK, and we looked at those reporting scripts. Now, by way of the reference slide, if you wanted to take a look at Nathan's script, that script is actually hosted on the eNow blog. So there's a link to that over there. I've also put a link to Lee Ford's blog on here. Again, amazing stuff. He's got some incredible stuff with Teams networking and just anything regarding the API and scripting for Teams. Really, really good resource. There's some information there about licensing and how you can kind of map add-on licensing to their actual names, which is really useful. And then, of course, the API reference, which I think is just something that is invaluable if you're going to be using the SDK at the moment, just while the documentation and all the rest of it gets baked. So I hope that was really helpful and useful to you. I'm going to stick around for the breakout later on if anyone has any questions, but I'm going to hand over to Justin at this point. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chris. I appreciated your license scripts and how to decode the names. That's certainly having an easy button is a good thing. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right. All right. So one of the challenges as administrators of an Office 365 environment that we have is how do we take our jobs to the next level and become very proactive around how we manage that whole end user experience of the Microsoft collaboration stack. And I think it's important to note that one of the distinctive value propositions of Office 365 is that you as an organization can leverage your existing on-prem assets like Active Directory or even Exchange if you wanted to keep Exchange for some reason, but still stitch together and provide this wonderful experience for your employees to leverage newer and modern ways to actually get work done, like using Teams, for example. But one of the challenges that we see, and I'm going to go into this very quickly, is sometimes it could be hard to answer a very simple question around visibility of that whole collaboration stack. And that is it a me problem or is it a Microsoft problem? And in addition to that, kind of a nuance of that is as we deliver cloud services to our employees, really being able to understand that end user experience becomes our prime directive within IT. So my job here is to kind of quickly show you how you can obtain a value kind of day one in obtaining that visibility. If you're a member of the Modern Workplace team within your organization, you probably have the charter to drive adoption and to quantify ROI, making sure that Teams and other services and apps within Office 365 are being used and you're getting work done quickly and solving problems. And then lastly, I'll touch on if you're an IT business leader and maybe you care more about making sure kind of dovetailing on the Modern Workplace team, that the Microsoft EA agreement is dialed in correctly. Maybe you have some research and maybe you want to right size to your users and understand. I'm going to show you that. It's a whirlwind tour, just a couple minutes here. So if I hit on anything that resonates with you, please come visit the eNow family in our chat room that we posted in the chat. You can actually win a couple $100 to the Microsoft Store, get a cool new Teams certified device for sure. So looking at a real world example here, when there are problems, kind of starting with the IT admin visibility scenario, when you do have problems with the collaboration service, that first question you have to answer, because again, you're using on-prem Active Directory, you're syncing that to Azure AD, you may be using ADFS, you have certificates, a lot of components within that authentication, authorization flow from the end user's desktop to the actual service. So how do you gain visibility very quickly when there's a problem? I think the common way for most of us is that we look at the service health dashboard, or maybe we also look at the Microsoft Twitter account. All good sources of information. But as I mentioned, kind of the complexity of this managing the service in today's day and age, especially with everybody working from home, and not everybody in the main within your organization, is it could be a problem with you, right? It could be a problem with an expired certificate on your ADFS server. It could be a problem with Active Directory. So how do you quickly identify in a visual manner where that link in the chain, or that chink in the chain, actually is? So kind of using a real world example, one of the previous outages with Teams, one of our customers kind of took me through their journey and how they were able to kind of triage this using the platform. So if you look here, I'll point out, I'm monitoring on-prem Exchange servers. Like most large enterprise organizations, you probably still have a couple handful Exchange servers in your environment. In this one look dashboard, you can see them and can see the health. You also see that we're testing different network endpoints within the Office 365 service. We're testing the directory authentication components. If you're using ADFS, we're testing directory synchronization. We're using a synthetic transaction there as well, making a change on-prem and making sure it actually syncs to Azure AD. As we know, Exchange Online, there's a ton of moving parts here, DNS, auto discover, to make sure that the end users are actually getting their mailboxes. One of the distinctive competencies of our platform, and why our customers like VMware and Wells Fargo love us, is the dashboard system. The green light, red light, universally accepted, whether you're in the NOC and this is on the big screen, or whether you're an L3 admin where you actually have to triage and figure out where these problems are. The design language of this is able to provide value at a glance for both of those situations. So in my customer's instance here, you'll see in their main data center where the software was installed, there was no issues with Teams. The Teams tests were passing synthetic transactions, mimicking how you connect into Teams. Just to kind of show you the complexity, if I scroll down here, by monitoring from different remote locations within the organization, I could see everything's working in New York, but I could very quickly see that there's a problem in my London location. I can see that there's a network problem accessing the Teams endpoints, and I can also see that I'm having some problems logging in and going through that authentication process as a Teams user. So I'm able to drill down all the way to the error message in a very quick fashion. And that level of clarity to kind of see the whole picture and know if it's an issue that you need to take action on, or if it's something where you just need to communicate or provide communication to your internal customers, the internal employees, that is super helpful to make sure that you're managing that whole Office 365 environment. I will point out that if you have a bad day with Active Directory, for instance, if you're having some issues with expensive LDAP queries, or you're not able to keep up with the LDAP queries for different domain controllers, you could see that too. So again, you kind of see that end-to-end language. And one of the things that I like to point out is the reason why we were able to come up with this design language is that the whole platform was actually built and founded by an Exchange admin who owned a consulting company and created this tool as a tool to deliver to their customers during engagements, and it turned into a software company. So I think that that's an interesting point to point out. From a report standpoint, if you kind of look at the report library, I'm not going to go into all of this, but if you're a part of the Modern Workplace team, there's several hundred reports here, kind of piggybacking on some of the interesting PowerShell scripts and automation that Chris talked about earlier, we have the ability for you to bring your PowerShell scripts. We all have different tools in our tool belt, and you can actually paste them and get reports out of those scripts, and then subscribe other maybe colleagues within your business to get those. So you don't have to set up scheduled tasks anymore. One of the reports that I really like to point out, because this is something that I think most organizations are, especially larger enterprises, are very adept at onboarding and offboarding. But one of the things that we see is sometimes organizations aren't able to fully adopt really interesting additional features within Office 365, like Project or Visio or even Power BI Pro, maybe because of cost. So being able to identify inactive licenses can really help fuel that addition of some of the higher end interesting apps within Office 365. So in this example here, you can actually see kind of what the cost, estimated cost, your unallocated cost. We're always going to have unallocated licenses, right? But what's important here is the inactive cost. And what customers find super helpful is we discover all the licenses you have. I could pick something, let's say like Project, for instance. You'll see here I have one in my tenant here. You can see the cost, it's assigned. What's interesting though is you could see that there's one inactive. So if I'm able to kind of select this right in line in the report and see who those users are. So if I need to clean that up so I can reassign them to other people that could maybe use them and get value, that's a big win for your organization, not just from a cost perspective, but from a productivity and adoption perspective. And that may be a leading indicator of adoption issues where you may need to target some additional training. The other thing that I see as customers start their journey into Office 365, they may have started with one license type and then maybe transitioned into another license type. For example, maybe you started with an E3 and then users started seeing the awesome value of Power BI, one of my personal favorite components of Office 365. Maybe they got a Power BI Pro license. And then maybe they were able to transition to an E5 license. And those other two licenses were not removed. So if you kind of look at this in this report, kind of overlapping licenses where you have multiple licenses that give you the same entitlement, you're able to see that for this specific user, there's 3 overlapping licenses. And we list them out, and then we show you what license to keep. So again, whether you're in the modern workplace team, or maybe you're part of the software asset management, or part of the IT business leadership, or maybe somebody's asking you as the IT admin these questions, these give you tools to solve those answers. And then lastly, candidates for license optimization. Inevitably, there's always kind of an understanding of we're going to potentially purchase this set of licenses across the board. And we expect people to use all the different apps and entitlements that come with those licenses. We know that it always doesn't happen that way. So it has a pretty special algorithm here that's looking at, based on the license, every entitlement that's part of that license, and it's looking at the real user behavior over a time period. I'm going to tell you, make a suggestion of what that right license size may be. This may be an opportunity for you to save. This may be an opportunity to kind of jumpstart the training program with the modern workplace team. But as you see, there could be a pretty large potential savings if certain users aren't right-sized. That could be repurposed in other maybe more premium E5 type licenses for other groups of users. So that kind of concludes our session today. In this session, Chris did an amazing job kind of going over those different PowerShell scripts and leveraging the power of Graph. We have more capabilities at our fingertips today as administrators within Office 365 to really provide value to our customers, our employees that work, that we're managing. It's not about just keeping the lights on anymore, right? It's about showing how we were able to impact the business and help move the business forward to their goals. So with that, just one last thing, I'll kind of reiterate, go please into the chat room, talk to the eNow staff to have the potential to win a $350 gift card to the Microsoft Store. And with that, thank you for everybody attending.
Great, thanks Justin, and thanks so much Chris as well for presenting and the great presentation today. As a reminder, the link to the breakout is there in the Q&A as an announcement, so go ahead and click on that and you can talk to Chris and Justin even more. If you have any questions, they'll take them in there. And please fill out that survey, not just for this session, but all of the sessions that you've attended. The CommsVerse team would really like to know what you thought about the content that you watched. So with that, everybody have a great rest of your week. And Chris and Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to present today.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.